Tell me about the current company.
The Ardonagh Group, founded in 2017, increasingly becoming a global organisation. Over 200 locations, 10,000 colleagues, evaluation north of 10 billion US.
You're the CDO, the Chief Data Officer of the Ardonagh Labs.
22 was kind of our first year in operation and scaling. We're up to about 30 people now. Would see myself as a business person first with, technology experience.
Do you have any thoughts or comments about the landscape right now?
Generally in terms of the stability of inward investment that we have in the country, all of that is really, really strong. How we govern, deploy and use a lot of those technical advances will become increasingly important. I still believe you will always need humans in the loop at different points. So what are those humans going to need to do? And what skills do they need to fulfill those roles?
Shane, thanks a million for saying yes to being on our Leaders in Tech podcast. Appreciate that, sir.
Yeah, not at all, Neil. Thanks very much for the invite. Very flattering to be asked to do it. So looking forward to the chat.
Take it back to, if it's okay, just around your educational choices, because you specifically went after kind of business and finance then in Trinity College. Take me back there and what made you take that particular path.
That's going a long way back.
Come on.
Yeah, no, I kind of had always been interested in tech and business. Had toyed with the idea of computing as a degree option as well, but in the end settled for probably the breadth of the business and economics degree, because there was a couple of modules in there as well with MIS and other stuff. So that was a bit more appealing and a little less techy, probably a nicer part of the campus. So
okay,
it was business to start with. And, I finished probably majoring in finance, but there would have been strong elements of operations management, marketing, and some MIS and computing in there as well. So kind of kept an interest there. But yeah, it was initially more into the finance world. Still wasn't too sure what I wanted to do when I came out, possibly accounting, investment banking, a lot of other options that went by the wayside as we went through it.
And it was, I suppose, the solid start you got in your career was very management consulting focused then, wasn't it, for a big chunk?
It was, yeah.
If you're looking back now, how did that, do you think, set yourself up for success?
Oh, it was fundamentally the foundation for all of it, really. Albeit I was probably a bit late getting into the management consulting. So, I tried during the milk round, didn't manage to land a place with any of the big six, I think, as they were at the time. And I ended up in Smurfits. So that was the offer I did get on the milk round. Definitely not a planned choice, but again, a great learning experience. But quite different, sort of moving from the Trinity campus to a cardboard box making factory in Arklow. My first time in an industrial environment. They literally, if you appeared on the factory floor, you'd have to watch out for a forklift driver chasing you around the place just for a bit of crack and brightening up their day. So it was quite different.
Phenomenal business though, right?
Yeah, amazing business. And working on the graduate scheme, you got a good opportunity. You did 4-6 month rotations in different parts of the business, different exposures to different things. And at that stage, there'd probably an awful lot more variety to what they were doing. So I would have done a stint in London with a newspaper they owned at the time. It's very much a sales and marketing and publishing role. Spent nearly a year ultimately in the head office working in global procurement, which was probably more my first data type project where I had to build a database in Excel just to capture and calculate rebates for global purchasing contracts around all of their operations. So you got a great visibility of the breadth of the group and all of the locations where they had plants. So very interesting. A lot of exposure to senior management, very, very early in your career. So that certainly helped take some of the intimidation, I guess, away from those kind of stakeholder interactions very early on. But really it was joining what was in Anderson Consulting in 97 was the foundation of probably the bulk of what I've gone on to do since. Would have spent about 9 years there. A lot of systems integration type work, albeit after boot camp I never coded, so I'm sure there's probably a lot of legacy systems still sitting in our financial services institutions are the better for that. But really good grounding in the life cycle discipline approach to doing tech type work and all of the things and pitfalls and risks as well as the capabilities and understanding kind of what you were doing and why. And then all the discipline around, how you manage projects and implement them. So they've all been, brilliant learning skills to have.
And what inspired you to pursue a career specifically in tech leadership then? Because you kind of got into leadership roles quite relatively early in your career.
Yeah.
Was that a fluke, or you just you just cracked on, seen the opportunity, went for it, and then you were recognized? Or how do you kind of reflect back at those opportunities that you manifested?
It's a good question. I mean, if I look back at the career, it's definitely never been linear. I mean, it zigzags like most people's do. Some of it's been planned, some of it's been accidental, some of it's been luck. Being in the right place at the right time. I think within Accenture, it was a little bit easier in terms of it was very, very structured. So you knew exactly more or less what you needed to do to continue to succeed and to progress. Very, very clear development frameworks around your career and what you'd like to do. And in some ways, getting early exposure to management in there was probably a little bit easier because, everybody's highly motivated. Everybody does things broadly the same way. Everybody's ambitious, very similar type A personalities. So my dad's early part of his career would have been in the army. So, it's kind of what it would have resonated with me in terms of that kind of command and control. Now it's presumably a very different sort of organization now. And even before I left, it would have been as we moved more into the outsourcing area and managing clients and managing, staff that would have transitioned to Accenture as part of outsourcing. So it's a much more diverse mix than it would have been, with the 300 odd that were there when I joined.
Wow. God, and what are they now? It's like phenomenal size.
It's old 6,500, 7,000, I think. Yeah. So it's a very different organization now and much more diverse than it probably would have been when I was working there. But those roles kind of just allowed you to progress, effectively with stabilizers on, a lot of support around you. And you went through the ranks effectively. It was more when you stepped out of that environment that things got a little bit more uncertain, and you probably had to rely on that foundation, but put yourself forward a little bit more for roles and demonstrate that kind of capability, to take on more responsibility elsewhere where it wasn't as easy in some ways to come by.
Okay. You had to seek it out now.
Yeah, because like most other organizations, it's very unstructured. You could go into, an organization where promotion was often based on tenure or the length of time in the job or experience. Sometimes, it might just be the number of people ahead of you in the queue. And then in other areas, it could be very volatile and fluid, and it's just, the right person for the right job. And you might have probably a less informal or less formal, sort of assessment structure where opportunity or talent gets spotted earlier and promoted and people get given more opportunities. So, I've probably had experience of all of those different types of things, and, some have worked and some haven't.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. Just in relation to leadership philosophy then, like, are there any kind of key principles or philosophies that guide, your approach to leading kind of technology teams or leading technology functions within an org? Anything that stand out? I'll be yo-yoing, by the way, between the present and the back, and we was,
Yeah, no, that's good. I'll try and keep up. I wouldn't say it's any one thing. I think, as I look back now, what I'm more acutely aware of is your leadership style needs to evolve, needs to adapt. And, certainly the people I've worked for that I've seen as being really successful, really good leaders, and where I'm hoping I'm still progressing towards is more of an adaptive style of leadership to the environment you're in. So, if we come back to the Accenture example, as I was saying, a little bit easier to direct and to manage things with people that are used to taking very clear instruction and just going and doing it and coming back with exactly what you asked for. That's very different in non-structured environments like that. And, particularly as you start to manage more diverse teams, no one size fits all, no one leadership style is going to work. And then, the mix of your team is one thing and the people you're leading is one thing. And then often, it's the organization or it's the circumstances the organization is in. I mean, it's, leading in a high growth stage, for example, is very, very different. It's probably an awful lot more fluid, more chaotic. Leading in a more mature organization where things are a lot more stable, then you're probably more focused on things like, motivation and ongoing reward and providing career opportunities for people to progress. So I think you have to be aware of that environment and adapt accordingly. But for me, personally, it's very much values driven. It's an awful lot of stuff around inclusion, giving people opportunity. And as I'm getting a lot older, you do start to look back a little bit more. It's a little bit more about legacy. What are you leaving behind when you look back? What is it you hope to have achieved? And it's not going to be the 6 or 7 projects you delivered. Increasingly for me now, it's more around, okay, well, have I passed on any of the stuff I've learned, or have I enabled somebody else's career in the same way as other people would have held open doors for me before, or helped me to progress? So that's probably personally where I'm a little bit more focused on now.
Okay.
I mean, I still get a huge kick out of building stuff or doing something new or delivering something that's of value, but I'm probably much more now, and thankfully I'm in a position where I can be focused on the people that we're hiring and how we bring them through.
Okay, so that pure development of them and
well, and I think increasingly anyway, you got to get beyond the point where you're the subject expert, because you can't be. I mean, stuff is changing so rapidly now, and much older individuals like myself are going to find it harder to keep up with the pace of change. And I think if you're determined to be that subject matter expert in one particular area, it's very, very hard to have the breadth of ability to really lead a broader team. So you have to get more focused on leading and delivering through others.
Got it. So, tell me about the current company, Ardonagh, that you work for at the moment. Give for our listeners and our viewers that haven't heard of them, who are they? Give us a quick match of the day.
Came about in 2017, born out of the amalgamation of a couple of broken businesses in the UK, predominantly the Towergate business, which our CEO David Ross had come in to help turn around. It was a pretty distressed business, strong in terms of a lot of its fundamentals, but struggling, commercially and from a funding perspective and everything. So the Ardonagh Group founded in 2017, and a lot of the model then was around assimilation and integration of different broking and insurance intermediary platforms, but very much a UK focus. If you fast forward, and it has been quite fast, and literally 6 years in the difference in terms of where we are today. Over 200 locations, 10,000 colleagues, evaluation north of 10 billion US, I think, as of recent reports. $1 billion in revenue. Something in the region of about 56 acquisitions, I think, in 23 to date. But more interestingly, 80% of those are outside the UK. So much more increasingly becoming a global organization. That grows out of the fact that a lot of the businesses, as we acquire them and integrate them into platforms within the group, they continue to trade under the brand names that they would have had, and a lot of those management teams and very entrepreneurial teams that established those businesses, continue to run them, and they continue to trade under those names. So, for example, in Ireland here, where Ardonagh would have bought the Aricus Group, the insurance and the trading name that people would recognise in Ireland would be Aricus.
Okay.
But they are part of the Ardonagh Group. The Analytics Lab, as we are now, is
so you're the CIO, you're the CDO, sorry, the Chief Data Officer of the Ardonagh
Analytics
Labs.
Yes.
Okay.
So we came into existence with a photo shoot in July 21. So it's a very short existence so far. Probably really started hiring in earnest towards the end of 21. But really, 22 was kind of our first year in operation and scaling. We're based in Mullingar in the centre of Ireland. We're up to about 30 people now. So quite a lot in a short period of time. But we've been effectively delivering and working on products since we first launched, using external parties to support us as we started to hire in. But, we're at a point now where all of the infrastructure and structure around our teams and our disciplines and all of those cross skills are in place, and it's really a question of scaling now as we find the opportunities to do more and more work around the group.
So that's what it is, though. It's all the projects you're working on. It's impacting that rapidly growing global beast. Is what it's becoming.
At the moment, it's pretty much all internal.
Got it.
But it's not to say that won't change. Obviously, we're working on a bunch of products and capabilities that have applicability, cross industry outside the group if there's opportunities to do that, whether that's with clients or other people, within the ecosystem of the businesses that we operate in. We ourselves as a group are even looking at, and some of this would have been commented on as a transition into more of an asset manager than just a consolidator of broking intermediaries. So over time, I'm sure that will add opportunities to it. We don't really have a big corporate group function or set of them, so that the lab is probably a little bit of an outlier in that respect. It's a capability that's now been established and is growing, and probably in a great position to be able to offer sort of shared service type capabilities to the group. So as we identify opportunities for leveraging the group's data, we can do that centrally. As we build products, we can identify opportunities where if it's worked in one part of the group, it could well work in other parts. And how do we start to roll that stuff out and repeat the process and scale it?
Okay. You mentioned Mullingar there, right?
Yeah.
So for many, I suppose, leaders and people that look around at Ireland and see other opportunities and see some very noticeable shifts in regional development. There's a big push and there's some good incentives to try and obviously decentralize some of our job creation. What's been your experience in building out capability and attracting talent to Mullingar? Because I know there'll be leaders listening up and down the country in particular who may have ideas of other areas in Ireland. Can you give us a snapshot, warts and all, if you don't mind?
Yeah,
there's probably some great wisdom.
No, it is, and it's a great question. We've done a couple of meetings with other prospective clients of the IDA who've been fully behind and supported in getting us set up and part of the project, and they would have been key to ultimately our choice of location as well. As part of their regional development strategy.
Sure.
It was more attractive for them to support something that wasn't going to be Dublin or Cork. At the time we were looking to set up, we would have been aware as well of competing with the skill sets, with Silicon Docs here in Dublin where we're sitting. That was obviously pre some of the recent developments where some of those big global techs were scaling back. The market was extremely tight here in Dublin. We knew we were going to struggle to try and compete with that, particularly for a completely brand new startup entity within a large group that people didn't know a huge amount about. So, trying to attract them away from some of those bigger international names is going to be a challenge. So doing it regionally made sense. We looked at a number of locations, ultimately settled on the Midlands, and actually in a nice sort of circling back of the group's origin, we end up in Mullingar, which is where our CEO David grew up. And actually the group itself is named after a small hill in just part of the townland just outside Mullingar.
Oh, okay.
And as they were trying to decide on a name for the group at the time, they were aware of this vision of building a business where you could look across a number of different businesses and have the visibility and the ability to guide it. So the Ardonagh area just came into mind, and that's how it ultimately came to be. So it's actually quite nice just to have a business that's specifically Ardonagh Group based back there where essentially a lot of it started. Definitely, a little bit of a punt. I mean, I we did the photo shoot in one of the nearby houses in lovely gardens, and that's literally what it was. It was a photo shoot, and it was like, okay, go and sort of sort it out now. And Conor Brennan, who's our chairman of Ardonagh International, and I'd worked with quite a lot in Zurich. He turned around as he's always want to offer great advice, and he said, it's a great opportunity for Shane now, just don't get up. Which was reassuring, but actually one of the great aspects of the group is that entrepreneurial nature and spirit. And because there is no big group head office and corporate function, it was like nobody was coming to tell me how to do it. Nobody was coming to say you need 6 data engineers and you need this. It was like you have to set up the data analytics center, so go and make it happen and work out, by the way, what you're doing as well and what you're delivering and how we're going to use it. So there's been huge autonomy. Obviously, we have a lot of senior stakeholders invested in it, and a lot of discussion around exactly where we would focus our time and what we would do. So there's been support there, but a lot of the time it's a question of asking for that help or asking for guidance or running ideas past them as opposed to taking a plan and going and delivering it. So that's been really interesting and really refreshing. And the hiring piece, a little bit of a challenge. I mean, we thought particularly post-COVID we'd get a little bit more of, pre-COVID, because we launched this in, it was just after the first lockdown, I think. So that's why we were out again. Actually, we were able to do the photo shoot. But then things got locked down again. We were conscious of the challenges of people finding accommodation and other things in Dublin. A lot of people maybe working in Dublin in tech roles, as well as being able to hire locally. And we probably anticipated more of an opportunity for people to move out of Dublin. But actually, some of the infrastructure challenges that we've had around, people finding accommodation elsewhere, because it's not just a Dublin thing anymore. So sometimes people would be reluctant to give up stuff before they'd find stuff. But gradually, I think, we had a bit of a rebrand in terms of the name of what we were calling the centre. And once we put the word lab into it, it certainly seemed to appeal to a lot of people. It was a bit more obvious that it was around analytics, as opposed to being a data centre, which, for a whole range of reasons, is sometimes a controversial way of describing things. And I think gradually, we got a little bit more PR around that. We had a really great event earlier this year in terms of launching the refurbished office, and Ardonagh to Micheál Martin came down to do that.
I've seen the LinkedIn posts. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it was great. And we got, I think, we had been going from somewhere in the region of, maybe 10, 15, 30 CVs a week to something like 300, just after he did. So way more than we're looking to hire. So it definitely works when you focus a little bit on the branding. But increasingly we're not finding the location as being a challenge. Once you had a bit of scale and once it became a bit more tangible for people to see, we've had people we've recruited from the area. We've had people who moved to Mullingar, where they would be a little bit more mobile in terms of their choice of location, weren't particularly hung up in Dublin. And certainly some of the people that we've had move to Mullingar, what they're able to get now for what they were paying in rent in Dublin, obviously significantly better, outside of Dublin. So, it's been a little bit slower than I might have liked.
Yeah.
I don't see it as a barrier now, particularly at the scale that we're at. I think it's only a question of building. Obviously with a little bit more of a challenge up front in terms of hiring the more experienced resources. Now we're at a level where we can start to do our own development. So, we've already formed links with TMS,
grad programs that you've seen,
things like that. So the ability to start hiring in at that level now and
take
train
a medium to longer term view.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. No, but I think it's a great case study and hopefully a sign of other opportunities for other regional.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a, if you build it, they'll come, but it does actually apply. The supports are there. The idea, we're brilliant at helping integrate us into the local community. We've gotten involved in things like the Chamber of Commerce. There's a Midlands Women in Tech event that our head of data operations, Marie Brown, has hosted events for or spoken at. So, once you start to get involved a little bit more in that ecosystem around you, it becomes a little bit easier again to build brand awareness, but also to
increase the inbound. Yeah, brilliant. So I just want to talk about that kind of team building and collaboration piece, right? So, and I'm really curious, like within a data role, like in a chief data role, and like, when it's relatively a traditional business, right? And when you're in a very senior role and you're trying to, I suppose, and again, you might correct me if I'm wrong in this, but my impression is that one would be trying to make data more of a real business value driver rather than merely like a major cost kind of center. Do you know what I mean? In relation to how you land that and how you demonstrate that real strategic competitive advantage. Like as a leader, when you're in that type of role and when you're building capability and trying to land the competitive advantage, that, single source of truth, data, innovation, that kind of stuff, like how do you really get all of those pieces of the jigsaw working so that it actually lands and it becomes like a real kind of business driver, value driver?
It's a great question. I know you're spot on. I mean, it's it's all too easy, particularly in tech roles. And even as we reach out now and we talk to parts of the business we might have spoken to before, it's, oh yeah, that sounds brilliant. I'll put you in touch with my MI guy or my data guy or my IT guy. And it's really not where we want to be. It's not that they're not important. They absolutely need to be part of the conversation. And we work quite closely with where we have got data and MI teams in the different parts of the business. But if you make it just an IT conversation, it's going to remain there in IT a lot of the time. And so much of the value that gets created from the technology gets lost because that translation layer just isn't there. I mean, I'm in a tech leadership role, but I would still, even go all the way back to that conversation around my undergrad, would see myself as a business person first with, technology experience. And I'm very conscious of our need to demonstrate value in business terms and in terms that our businesses understand. So not in terms of it's great because you can get the information easier. It's actually, this is going to help you to grow your number of customers. It's going to help you to grow the GWP. It's going to improve your income and your yield. Here's how we can help you do that. Here's what the data is going to show you, which a lot of the time hasn't been done before. Somebody will ask for a report and they'll be looking for a specific answer to a particular question. A lot of what we're working on and building on is identifying where we feel actually there may be other opportunities to do things here and answer questions that aren't being asked, really. I think is some of the way. We had a really interesting summit there with a lot of our new international businesses in Portugal a couple of weeks ago. And a piece of work that we had kind of kicked off ourselves and have been looking at got referenced in the room, and David, as our CEO, is closing some of the conference and talking about that. He said, if we have a team based in Mullingar that aren't involved in the core day-to-day broking operations, the business can identify through data an opportunity to help grow our income. All they need to do is find one or two of those every year, and it more than returns the investment. So thankfully for us, it was great in terms of highlighting what we can do.
Yeah.
And really after that, it's around building the relationships. I mean, I'm spending much more of my time now either focused on product development or out talking to leaders in the business around the group, around how we can help and what we can do or what challenges they're trying to overcome. Thankfully now, all the infrastructure's there with the team in Mullingar that sort of the day-to-day operations I don't have to spend as much of my time on.
And do you get I'm going to say this, but non-tech execs, right, asking you, so Shane, tell me about this AI stuff. What can we do with this? Or is there added pressure now? Is it a good thing that, there's so much, I suppose, front and center dialogue around AI and ML and how we can hopefully use it for value? But is there, as the CDO, do you get so much more inbound now since it's become a bit more, dare I say, sexy?
Probably not as much as you might in other organizations.
Okay.
There's a little bit more maturity, or they're looking for, people will be aware of the latest great thing in IT. In some respects, we're doing everything from helping with, fairly simple, straightforward foundational work around building data warehouses or consolidating into one place to do some more rudimentary reporting. We would have spent time last year with our data science team working on things like propensity modeling and other stuff. And then, we end up in a really interesting conversation with myself and our group CFO, who's ultimately signing the checks for everything we're doing, and she had a really good perspective. She said, why are you working on something like that when I can't get the answers easily to one or two of these other more fundamental questions that are actually, business KPIs? And that wasn't in any way a reflection on the business itself. It was just sometimes it could be difficult to extract those answers. So, she would have an awareness of, okay, that there's great opportunity here in terms of predictive modeling and other things like that. But at the same time, let's make sure we've got the fundamentals covered first.
Okay.
And then once we've done that, so I think, we spent a lot of 22 and 23 probably helping to put some of those building blocks in place in a lot of those businesses that we worked with. Now we've more of an opportunity to start looking at, predictive things or the use of AI. Again, as an industry, I think some of that stuff could be useful more in personal lines around retail, where it's probably much more fast flow and, data's transacting, at much higher volumes than in real time, and you're involved in pricing and other things and fraud detection. Probably more use cases than there are in, say, commercial broking. And certainly as you start to scale up the complexity into things like, some of our more specialty lines of business, the use of AI there, where the data sets are much smaller and the insurance itself and the product is much more complex, there's probably fewer opportunities.
Okay.
Unless we're involved in some of the actual underwriting work or in modeling work that will help to actually provide more information to the market when we're looking for prices and stuff.
Okay.
So I definitely see probably a little further down the line it'll be useful. I mean, we're toying around with things, and we would have worked on a couple of proof of concepts last year, for example, on data ingestion and OCR type stuff using code as opposed to specific software, because a lot of the challenges we have with broadening the data set that we do pull in centrally to analyze is actually a lot of it's all, handwritten sheets of paper or stored in files. So how can we actually start to industrialize the extraction of that? We would have worked on stuff up to the point of even handwriting analysis, and could we, where people have written
were you passing the doc?
So we'd pass, take a document that might actually have a handwritten percentage participation written on it.
Oh, okay.
And rather than having to review that manually, could you write the code that would extract it and identify it? And unfortunately, some of our data science got quite frustrated when they could get to 70% accuracy on that. So, but interesting proof of concept for us to do. Not everything we're going to take on and look at doing is going to be a success, but that's, fundamentally what you need to be doing from an innovation perspective.
It's labs.
It is, yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. If we're true to the authenticity of it. You touched on kind of diversity and I think inclusion there early on in the conversation, but I did want to go there because it's still obviously a hot topic. But is there anything that you've learned or any tips, I guess, for aspiring leaders to promote, diversity and inclusion within your tech org? And I suppose why is it actually so important for success?
It really is. I mean, not just because it's the right thing to do in terms of giving everybody the opportunity, to prove themselves in a role or to apply for a role or to do something that they're qualified to do. It shouldn't matter, where they've come from, how they identify, what their gender is, what their experience or their background is. Can they do the job, and can they do the job really, really well? So that's just kind of a hygiene factor. I think and that's not to be in any way dismissive of the fact there's massive barriers to overcome for so many people to get to that point. I just mean from a consideration perspective, you should be putting a barrier in place, and you should be doing everything you can to remove those. So that's kind of one. But for me, what I've definitely learned is just the richness of what you get from creating a more diverse team is just invaluable. And it was a really important lesson for me post the Accenture days, where, as I said, there was probably much more homogeneity to the resource mix and the resource pool. Like of our cohort that started together in a group of 10, was 6 of us married to each other. So I don't know what that's reflective of. I think it was either just a lot of shared values and experience and personalities, or just that we didn't get out to socialize on a broader basis in those early days. But when I first started a similar role with Aon back in 2008 or 9, and in setting up a similar operation for them, and I wasn't that long out of Accenture at the time, and shortly after I had joined, the CEO joined, and he started interviewing for some of these other teams, and he was hiring all these people, and I was looking around me going, this is a disaster. Like, this is all just there's going to be chaos here, because these people all just do things differently, and they don't follow process, and they don't do this. And I was so happy to be proved wrong, because just the diversity, not just in background and experience, but in thought, more importantly, that they brought to the table. And that was where you got different ideas coming to the fore. I mean, if you just hired everybody with the same stuff, you're just going to get the same results coming out of it. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right. I think there's still massive challenges and a long ways to go, particularly on gender in the tech space. And I'm not sure. I think, we're making great strides in terms of making STEM careers more attractive. and hopefully it'll continue to evolve, particularly as we get more female leaders in tech. You know, it's coming back to that. If you can see it, you can be it. You know, we haven't had those examples in the past. Increasingly now, we are, you know, really impressive female leaders around the place. We're lucky in the lab, you know, not by design necessarily, but we've ended up with a pretty good representative split, and even, you know, in our management team. But as we've been doing a lot of our recruiting, you know, the reality, unfortunately, at the moment is that the graduate level pool and the people that are still doing a lot of those courses are predominantly male. So the pool that you're having to choose from ends up being a little bit smaller, and that continues to create effectively a bit of a bottleneck as you go through, and it's harder and harder to get the same representations as you go all the way up.
But is there more that? But on that, right? So like, is it? Do we need to, I suppose, as an industry, as an ecosystem, work harder earlier on? Do you know what I mean? Like, do we need to do more at secondary level, at primary level, to inspire, you know, and I suppose make it more achievable, attractive?
Yeah, I think so. I think
is that, I know this is a global challenge.
Yeah, no,
it's not just
it is. I think
localised,
you're right. I think it goes right back to whether it's primary and secondary education. I think maths is definitely, and how maths is taught seems to be a blocker.
Yeah.
I think some of that is sometimes, you know, a confidence thing, and you know, my experience anyway, certainly from my generation, guys are much more likely to, and they say this about job applicants, is, you know, you can do 30% of the job requirements I'm going to apply for.
Oh, I know.
And I'll blag my way into the rest of it. Whereas, you know, sometimes, unfortunately, you know, females will look at things and they'll go, well, I can't do these 3 things. So therefore, and we just need to find a way of breaking that. And I think everybody needs to be honest and appreciate that, you know, 60% of it is genuine ability and the rest of it's spoofing. And, you know, you need a little bit of confidence to try it. I think how maths is taught and making that more inclusive, I think it still seems to be a problem. And then I think it's coming back to that examples piece. So are there more role models there that can get promoted? Do people genuinely see this as a path forward, or a career option that they should and can be interested in? I mean, we even, when we were refurbishing our office there, we've named the rooms and themed them around different things. So whether it's kind of local areas, parts of history, leaders in data and analytics in the past, and like one of them is named after Booth, but it's not after, you know, it was Booth's wife, who was a, you know, senior mathematician, but, you know, going back to that time, she couldn't teach publicly, and you know, her career wouldn't have been recognized, but would have been, you know, fundamental to the development of some of the techniques and algorithms and other things like that at the time. So, you know, we've been aware of trying to, can we find opportunities? But when I went searching for, you know, female pioneers in data and analytics, it's very hard to come up with examples. So we need to create more of those, I think, going forward.
Well, that's very proactive then. So, you know, obviously went after to seek that out to try and...
Yeah, it was just something we thought, look, because you have to try and make it you know, that we've got things to talk about as we bring people into the lab, hopefully, and let them see it, yeah.
But the split is quite good, is it?
Split's quite good. Yeah. I mean, we're probably not at 50-50, but certainly, you know, it's not for a lack of trying. Yeah.
When you look back at, I know you said you're a bit maybe humble and unassuming, but you said, you know, some of it was luck and some of it was, you know, getting into these leadership roles. But when you look back with kind of hindsight, like, would you have any tips or any advice for, say, people are in, they might be in tech mid-management type of roles, or they might be at the principal IC roles, but have the ambition to get into more kind of senior management, or you know, a seat at the strategic table and that type of influence. Is there any kind of, I don't know, Shane Keating kind of golden rule book, or just anything that you've learned? Like, do you think, God, you know, that was fundamental, that was a real, you know, accelerator, or just anything you'd like to share?
God, that's a great question. I think it's probably coming back to some of that communication and that perception or language around it's, you know, a business challenge and a business solution as opposed to a tech one. You know, and you mentioned, do you get many business execs coming and asking about AI? I mean, you might if they've read an article or seen something on their social media. But generally, that's often, unfortunately, where the interest stops, you know. And a lot of organizations, you know, if they're doing well, they've got IT at the executive table. In a lot of cases, it's not. It's sort of pushed in under, say, ops, you know, which might have an amalgamation of a couple of other disciplines as well. So it can be hard to get that executive sponsorship awareness, depending on the type of business, of course. And some are more functionally siloed than others. But, you know, that whole argument of cost center versus revenue generation. So the sales guys get all of the glory, but, like, you know, have they delivered all of those results purely on the basis of their own brilliance and magnificence, or has it been enabled by, you know, tooling they've been given, or information or analysis, you know, that's been produced by people in IT roles? But in my experience, you don't necessarily find an awful lot of executive leaders in other disciplines that are really keen to learn more about the tech. You know, coming back to the earlier conversation, I'll get you to talk to my data guy or my MI guy, right? So the onus is going to be always on the IT leaders to talk to those execs in terms that resonate with them. So talk to them about their sales challenges, talk to them about, you know, how they need to grow, talk to the ops leaders around how you can improve efficiencies, talk to the marketing guys around how you can use data to improve, you know, brand awareness or building it. And I think if you can focus on those and learn as much as you can about the business that you're a part of and the industry that you operate in, I think it just lends an awful lot more credibility to being able to demonstrate value, because ultimately, you know, you are a service function. You're either a sales guy or you're helping someone who is selling, you know, because otherwise it's very difficult for an organization to make money commercially, right? So
yeah.
How do you sell that value proposition? Yeah.
When you look at mistakes, right, stuff that you've, you know, where you kind of get that moment like, oh God,
yeah,
if only I didn't do that, or if only someone kind of that,
yeah,
you know, again, I'm asking to be a bit vulnerable here now. Like, is there any kind of lessons or insights from your early career that you're like, crap, if I'd have known that earlier, I wouldn't have done that? Or
how long have we got?
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Narrowing that down.
Again, with a lens of learning and development. Right?
Yeah.
With a lens of helping our listeners who are predominantly in tech roles and tech leadership roles, or business owners or startups, and, you know, have ambition and
yeah, I mean, there's a couple that stand out. There was one particular example, sort of before I left Accenture, and I was transitioning out of core project delivery and systems integration role. I'd been working with a director, and we were setting up an outsourcing practice within financial services. So we were doing our first bit of operational management of, and I got to run an applications team, which was predominantly client staff and a couple of Accenture people. And again, very used to the more direct command and control type stuff, and very early on in my people management career. And I'll come back to why this is important, I think, for tech people in particular. And there was something cropped up. We were about 2 days away from a big upgrade to the system, and one of the team leaders came up and wanted the following day off, like 2 days before the thing was due to go live over the weekend. And you know, I said, surely you could have booked this a bit earlier and whatever else. So I went off to talk to my directors. What do I do? I haven't come across this kind of situation before. And he said, go and tell him no way. And he's not getting the day off, and just tell him he has to suck it up and get on with it. So in hindsight, not great advice. But similarly, I didn't necessarily question it. I just kind of assumed that this was the right thing to do. And the mistake I made was literally just relaying that message. And the poor guy got really, really upset. And only then did I stop and think to ask why it was important to him. And it turned out, I think it was his father's anniversary. The family were getting together, as they had done for the previous year or two, to spend time just marking it. And it was really important to him personally. And I hadn't even thought to ask why.
wow.
Like, he himself would have not asked, you know, with something so serious coming up in work, if it hadn't been important. And I just didn't realize I didn't think to do it. Wow. And it made me a lot more humble and a lot more aware of the need to actually just focus on, you know, there's a broader perspective here than just delivery, and you know, when you're managing people, you need to be aware of other things going on in their lives other than just work. And the point being, I think, is that, you know, ask questions. Don't assume you've got the answer, or don't assume because you've done something before, or this is how you do things, that's always the right answer. So coming back to the point about why I think that's important for tech leaders is that a lot of people, particularly very technical resources earlier in their career, you know, their strength has been their technical capability, and they've probably gotten promoted based on becoming the more senior technical resource and the more senior technical resource. And we're even conscious of this now as we're building a career framework for the teams that we have, is that at some point you probably reach an inflection, and some people will want to go down more of a technical SME route, and that's fine. They've no interest in managing people. Other people want to move into that people management side of things. And I think that's probably the first big inflection point for tech leaders, is when they start to manage other resources. And for a lot of people that go into tech, you know, things like empathy, emotional intelligence, people management skills don't necessarily come as easily to people that have been very focused on often quite binary outcomes in the work that they do day to day. There are exceptions, but it's probably a skill set that, you know, you need to develop. So I think focusing on that will be good.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, no, that's a humbling.
Yeah. I mean, when you end up feeling absolutely awful, for just being a terrible human being, you know, those kind of things stick with you. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, again, for me, it just made me much more aware of, you're going to end up managing and leading very different groups of people with different perspectives. I mean, this was somebody who'd worked for the organization for an awful long time, you know, was much older than I was, way more experienced from a technical development perspective and everything else. And, you know, being able to navigate that and appreciate what they were bringing versus what you felt you had to do because you were now a manager or something. So.
With a forward lens, right? And we're looking at opportunities, and we're looking at innovation, and we're looking at evolution. Like, do you have any thoughts or comments about the landscape right now, for whether it's you, whether it's the business, whether it's Ireland? Like, do you have any kind of opinions or thoughts on how are we doing, basically, as a country? Well, I think you've been in the industry for a long time. You've had some big senior roles in different types of businesses, different size of businesses. You've built stuff. You have quite a wise lens, and I'm just curious, like, are we set up well at the moment? Like, is there anything more we need to do? I mean, you've touched on some of the stuff there in relation to some proactive measures from a diversity inclusion perspective. I think there's definitely more we can do on that, and we're all responsible for that. Anything else? Like, is there any kind of snippets or anything that you want to leave our audience with?
I think as a country, we're in a brilliant place. I think just how it's changed from, you know, when I was entering into college, coming off the back of a recession before the Celtic Tiger was even thought of, where emigration was still, you know, a significant factor for a lot of people in terms of careers, to where we are now, where, you know, you've net inward migration, we're almost a full employment, you know, and that's having come out of a pandemic. You know, I think that there's obviously significant challenges and inequalities in society in general, but I think as an economy, and I think, you know, generally in terms of the stability of inward investment that we have in the country, all of that is really, really strong. I think the other thing I've noticed that's quite different, and I've had a bit of experience in terms of the fintech or insurtech experience before joining Ardonagh, is that there's just a different attitude to entrepreneurship and people being willing to take risks that weren't there when I was leaving college. You know, to start up a business or something like that, particularly in something like the tech space, it was only ever going to be in Silicon Valley. You know, we have our own Silicon Docs now, and I think what you're starting to see is an ecosystem spinning off that now, where a lot of people have worked in those companies and are setting up businesses that are, you know, international businesses now. You look at the success of the likes of the Collison brothers and others with Stripe and others, where I think there's just a lack of fear. There's an acceptance and a willingness to go, okay, this might fail. Whereas, you know, my generation, it was like, you know, go to college, get a steady job, probably in the bank, you know, make sure you get your pension sorted and whatever. That is just, I don't think, any longer there. I mean, obviously people have different approaches to careers and a series of careers and choice, and there's opportunities. So I think that's fantastic. other than that, you know, AI, are we all doomed? Will this all be, you know, if we talk about tech, and you know, I'm even between, say, the Aon experience I had in setting up data analytics there in 2008 and 9 versus what our guys are able to do now, and the tools they have available to them, it's night and day. I mean, stuff that can be built in terms of building data pipelines or analyzing the data and the tools and capabilities. And that's in a very short space of time. And it's changing so quickly again. And, you know, the ability for AI to generate and write code now, I think, is going to make a lot of those processes more efficient. You know, the one thing that I think is going to be increasingly important is focusing on just those tech disciplines now won't be sufficient. I think for me, critical thinking skills and analysis skills are absolutely crucial. You know, how we govern, deploy and use a lot of those technical advances will become increasingly important. I still believe you will always need humans in the loop at different points. So what are those humans going to need to do, and what skills will they need to fulfill those roles? I think thankfully it seems to be changing even at secondary level. It's not prepping for the same rote learning, leaving cert that was there before, and going into college where you maybe broaden your perspective a little bit. I think people are being asked to evaluate and look at things now, and I think it's a much bigger challenge. You know, I look at my own kids now, and you know, some of the recipes my daughter's tried off TikTok are great way of explaining how, you know, what you get on there isn't going to work, and you might blow up the kitchen while you're at it or give somebody food poisoning. But being able to decipher, you know, a lot of that information flow and identifying what's real and what's not real, you know, that's going to come down to the ability to analyze information, to make critical decisions around that, and how we develop those skills and the ability to interpret that stuff, I think, is going to be increasingly important, because, you know, the information is coming at you from so many different sources, most of them unverified now, that it's becoming increasingly difficult.
So complex, but full of opportunity.
Huge.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, a nice positive way to finish up then, Shane. Thanks a million.
That's all.
Pleasure chatting to you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Neil.
All right, Shane. Cheers.